You're sitting in a kitchen in Tuscarawas County, Ohio, in the third week of February. Outside the window, the thermometer nailed to the porch post reads 4 degrees Fahrenheit. There has been no temperature above freezing in this county for 11 consecutive days. The wind coming off the fields is the kind that makes the inside of your nose hurt before you've walked 20 feet. You drove here in a car with heated seats and you are still cold from the parking lot. Inside this kitchen, it is 73 degrees. You are sitting in your shirt sleeves drinking coffee that was brewed on a cast iron stove that has not been refueled since this morning. There is no furnace. There is no boiler. There is no propane tank outside, no oil-filled pipe on the foundation wall, no gas meter on the side of the house. There is a stove, a specific wall construction you will not find in any modern building code, a floor system that has not changed since this farmhouse was built in 1902, and a family that has never paid a heating bill in the 4 generations they have occupied this house because the house itself was designed from the foundation up to need almost no heat input to maintain human comfort even when the world outside is trying its hardest to freeze everything in it. A mechanical engineering professor at Ohio State named Dr. Gerald Fasnacht visited this farm and 2 others in Tuscarawas County in November of 2018 as part of an informal research interest he had pursued for 6 years outside his official university research portfolio, because his official university research portfolio was funded in part by grants from 2 HVAC manufacturing companies whose products his findings would have embarrassed. What he found in those 3 farmhouses he described to his graduate students on returning as thermodynamically inconsistent with every efficiency model his department had been teaching for 20 years. He repeated those words at a passive building engineering conference in Vienna in March of 2019 to an audience of 340 researchers and practitioners from 22 countries. They gave him a standing ovation. Ohio State's engineering department, when contacted by a trade publication that attended the Vienna conference, declined to comment. Fasnacht retired from the university 14 months later. He now consults independently and has visited 23 Amish farms in 5 states. He told me the Tuscarawas farmhouse was the most efficiently heated residential structure he had examined in 34 years of professional practice. Here is the number that changes everything. The average American household spends $1,200 a year on home heating, according to the Energy Information Administration's most recent Winter Fuels Outlook. In the northeastern United States, where winter temperatures regularly drop below zero for extended periods, that number climbs to $1,800 to $2,400 annually, depending on fuel type. The Amish farms in Tuscarawas County that Fasnacht visited spend an average of $180 a year on heating fuel, not $1,800, $180. The difference is not insulation thickness or window ratings or programmable thermostats or any of the incremental efficiency improvements the building industry has been selling American homeowners for 40 years. The difference is a fundamentally different understanding of what a building is supposed to do and how heat behaves inside a correctly designed one. The modern American home is designed to be heated. The Amish farmhouse is designed to hold heat. Those are not the same thing, and the gap between them is the gap between a $1,200 annual heating bill and a $180 one. The Tuscarawas system operates on 4 interlocking principles, and understanding all 4 is necessary because none of them works at full effectiveness in isolation. The Amish did not design the system by understanding the 4 principles separately and combining them deliberately. They arrived at the combination through 200 years of building what worked and not building what didn't, which produced the same result that deliberate engineering would have produced, and produced it without a single university research grant or industry development budget. The first principle is thermal mass, and in Tuscarawas County, it is built into the walls in a way that goes beyond anything I described in the Quiche-Coquillas Valley system from a previous video. The exterior walls of the 1902 farmhouse are 28 inches thick, not 28 inches of a single material. 28 inches of a 3-layer composite that the original builder, working from a tradition brought from the Baden-Württemberg region of southwestern Germany, assembled with a precision that Fasnacht's infrared thermography confirmed was still performing at original design specification 116 years after construction. The outer layer is locally quarried sandstone, 8 inches thick. laid in a lime mortar that remains flexible enough after a century to absorb the seasonal thermal expansion and contraction of the stone without cracking. The middle layer is a rubble fill of broken stone, wood ash, and dampened clay, packed to a density that Fasnacht measured at 112 pounds per cubic foot, close to the theoretical maximum for that material combination. The inner layer is fired brick, 4 inches thick, finished with a lime plaster containing a small proportion of animal hair for tensile reinforcement, a technique the Romans used in their permanent military structures and that the Baden-Württemberg building tradition preserved unbroken for 1,500 years. That wall assembly has a thermal lag, the time required for outdoor temperature change to penetrate to the interior surface, of 16 to 18 hours. When the temperature outside drops to 4 degrees at midnight, the interior wall surface does not register that drop until late afternoon the following day, at which point the outdoor temperature is already recovering. The interior of the house never experiences the outdoor temperature minimum. It experiences a smoothed average that sits comfortably above the threshold where any supplemental heat is needed on all but the coldest extended cold snaps of the year. The second principle is strategic heat generation, and this is where the cast iron stove becomes something more than a stove. The farmhouse has one primary heat source, a single cast iron wood-burning stove positioned in the geometric center of the ground floor, not against a wall, not in a corner, in the center, where its radiant output reaches every direction equally. The stove sits on a sandstone hearth pad 4 inches thick that extends 36 inches in every direction from the stove's base. That pad absorbs heat during every burn cycle and radiates it back into the room for hours after the fire dies down. The stovepipe runs vertically through the house for 14 feet before exiting through the roof, and that 14-foot run of iron pipe acts as a secondary radiator, transferring heat from the exhaust gases into the interior air of every room it passes through rather than sending it straight outside as modern sealed combustion appliances do. The wood burned in that stove is exclusively dense hardwood, primarily oak and hickory, split to a consistent 4-inch face width that the family has maintained by eye across 4 generations because that dimension produces the burn duration and heat output the stove was sized for when it was installed. Burning wider splits produces incomplete combustion. Burning narrower splits produces too fast combustion with insufficient heat transfer to the stove body. The 4-inch split is not tradition for tradition's sake. It is the empirically derived optimum for that specific stove in that specific room, arrived at over decades of paying attention to what the fire was doing and adjusting accordingly. The stove is fired twice daily, once in the early morning before the household rises, once in the early evening before outdoor temperatures reach their nightly minimum. Between firings, the thermal mass of the stove body, the hearth pad, the walls, and the floor maintains interior temperature without any active heat input. Fasnacht's data logging during his November visit recorded interior temperature variation of less than 4 degrees across a 24-hour period during which outdoor temperatures swung 31 degrees. One stove, twice daily. 4-degree interior variation against a 31-degree outdoor swing. The third principle is floor thermal management, and it is the element of the Tuscarawas system that Fasnacht described as the detail nobody in American building science is talking about. The ground floor of the 1902 farmhouse is not wood. It is not concrete. It is not tile over a subfloor. It is 3 inches of fired clay tile laid directly over a 6-inch bed of compacted sand over undisturbed subsoil. The tile surface sits at ground level, thermally connected through the sand bed to the earth below, which in Tuscarawas County maintains a constant temperature of 54 degrees year-round, regardless of what the surface weather is doing. In summer, that floor connection draws heat out of the interior, providing passive cooling. In winter, the 54-degree floor acts as a thermal floor, a lower boundary that prevents interior temperature from dropping below 54 degrees through radiation loss to the ground, even if the stove has been cold for 24 hours. The house cannot get colder than 54 degrees as long as the floor connection to the earth is maintained, regardless of what is happening outside, regardless of whether the stove has been fired, regardless of whether anyone is home. 54 degrees is not comfortable for living, but it is the baseline from which the stove raises the interior, and it means the stove is never fighting from a starting point of outdoor temperature. It is always fighting from 54 degrees upward. In a house where the outdoor temperature is 4 degrees, the conventional heating system starts from 4. The Tuscarawas system starts from 54. The stove has a 50-degree head start before it burns a single piece of wood. To understand why the Amish arrived at these solutions while the rest of America abandoned them, you have to understand what life looked like before the utility companies drew their lines across the continent and decided that heat was something you purchased rather than something you built into your walls. In 1900, the year before the Tuscarawas farmhouse was completed, 98% of rural American homes heated themselves through some combination of thermal mass, wood combustion, and passive solar orientation. The knowledge of how to build a house that held heat was not specialized knowledge. It was common knowledge, the kind every carpenter, every mason, every farm family carried as a matter of survival necessity. A house that failed to hold heat in a northeastern Ohio winter was not an inconvenience. It was a threat to life. The standards were enforced not by building codes or inspection regimes, but by the consequence of getting it wrong. Consequences severe enough that 2 centuries of accumulated building wisdom had been refined to a very high level of practical effectiveness by the time the gas companies began extending their distribution networks into rural areas in the 1930s and 1940s. What the gas line offered was not better heat, it was easier heat. And in the transaction that followed, an entire civilization traded its 200 years of hard-won building knowledge for a monthly bill and a dependency that 3 generations later almost nobody alive remembers how to live without. The Amish made a different trade. They kept the knowledge and declined the bill. That decision, made quietly and without confrontation in communities across Ohio and Pennsylvania in the middle of the 20th century, is the reason a farmhouse in Tuscarawas County is sitting at 73 degrees on a 4-degree February morning, while the house next door is running a furnace that costs $1,200 a year to feed. The 4th principle is controlled ventilation, and it is the principle most directly in conflict with modern building code requirements. Modern building codes require mechanical ventilation in all new residential construction because modern buildings are built so tightly with vapor barriers and synthetic sealants and foam insulation that they cannot breathe naturally without accumulating moisture, carbon dioxide, and indoor pollutants to levels that become a health concern. The code solution to a problem created by modern building materials is a mechanical system that moves air in and out of the building on a schedule, consuming electricity to do what the building's own material selection should have prevented becoming necessary. The Tuscarawas farmhouse breathes. The lime mortar between the sandstone blocks is vapor permeable, meaning moisture moves through it in both directions in response to vapor pressure differentials. The lime plaster on the interior brick is similarly permeable. The house inhales slightly dry outdoor air in winter through the wall assembly itself across a 28-inch thermal buffer that warms and humidifies that air before it reaches the interior and exhales interior moisture-laden air through the same pathway when interior vapor pressure exceeds exterior. No mechanical system, no electricity consumption, no maintenance. The wall is the ventilation system, and it has been performing that function without a single moving part since 1902. Modern building inspectors cannot approve this system because their licensing curriculum contains no framework for evaluating vapor-permeable mass wall ventilation. The form does not have a box for it, so the modern equivalent gets built with a vapor barrier that suffocates the wall, a mechanical ventilator that costs electricity, and an HVAC system that costs $1,200 a year to run. And the result is a house that is less comfortable, less durable, less efficient, and more dependent than the farmhouse that has been sitting in Tuscarawas County since 1902 doing exactly what a house is supposed to do. Now here's what this means for someone who already owns a modern home and cannot rebuild their walls from sandstone and rubble fill. The floor principle is the most accessible retrofit, and it costs almost nothing to begin. Adding thermal mass at floor level in the form of dense stone or ceramic tile over an existing subfloor where structurally feasible begins to establish the thermal floor effect even in a house built on a conventional framed floor system. The effect is partial compared to the Tuscarawas clay tile on compacted sand, but partial is not nothing when partial means your heating system starts each cycle from a higher baseline temperature. The stove principle is fully accessible. A correctly sized and positioned wood-burning or biomass stove with an extended interior flue run, installed by a certified chimney professional to satisfy code requirements, replicates the core heat generation and distribution logic of the Tuscarawas system in any existing home with a wood source available. The stove position matters. Center of the floor plan, not against an exterior wall, is the correct answer, and it is the answer the Amish arrived at 200 years before heat transfer modeling software existed to confirm it. The ventilation principle is accessible through material selection in any renovation or addition. Lime plaster over masonry, lime mortar, repointing of existing brick, and the avoidance of vapor-impermeable synthetic sealants on any surface that should breathe are all decisions available to any homeowner undertaking work on an existing structure. They cost the same as the alternatives. They perform better over the long term. They are almost never specified by modern contractors because modern contractors were trained in a curriculum written by an industry that profits from the mechanical systems that vapor-impermeable construction makes necessary. Dr. Fasnacht sat in the Tuscarawas kitchen in his shirt sleeves in November, watching his data logger record a 2.3-degree interior temperature variation across 6 hours, while outside, the wind was dropping the apparent temperature to -8. And he told the family sitting across from him that he had spent 34 years teaching building efficiency and that his department's models did not predict what he was observing. The grandmother of the household, a woman of 79 who had lived in that house her entire life and whose mother had been born in it, looked at him across the table and said, in the particular quiet way of someone who has never needed to be surprised by a thing that has always worked, that she supposed the house knew what it was doing. She was right. The house knew what it was doing in 1902, and it knows what it is doing now, and it will know what it is doing long after every gas furnace and electric heat pump installed in America this year has been hauled to a landfill and replaced with whatever the industry sells next to maintain the dependency they built into every home constructed after 1950. The stove costs $800 used, the wood comes from the farm, the wall has been standing for 122 years. The heating bill is $180. Drop your state in the comments and tell me what you pay for heat in winter. Tell me what your walls are made of and whether your house has ever had a furnace failure in a cold snap, because the answer to that question tells you everything about the difference between a house designed to hold heat and a house designed to be heated. And if you have ever walked into an old stone or brick building in winter and noticed that it felt warmer than it should, now you know why. The wall was doing what walls were designed to do before an industry decided that walls should be dumb, and the equipment should be smart, and the bill should be monthly, and the dependency should be permanent. Next week, I'm going to show you 20 Amish gardening techniques that commercial agriculture has spent 80 years trying to bury. Methods so productive that a single quarter-acre Amish kitchen garden in Stark County outproduced a 2-acre commercially managed plot in a side-by-side university comparison that the Agricultural Extension Service funded, received, and declined to publish. The lead agronomist on that study told me the results were not what their funders were expecting. The funders were 2 of the largest seed companies in the United States. The Amish garden is still producing. The study is still unpublished. And next week, you are going to learn every single method that garden uses.